So, good evening, everyone. I want to just make sure, because I was told from a very young age that I don't know how to control the volume of my voice. Could y'all tell me in the back if you could hear me? Thumbs up, thumbs down. I'm used to pacing back and forth like I'm performing on stage, like I'm Gene Simmons. So I'm painted in a corner here, so this is unnatural for me. So, my name is Kyle Dickinson. As you've guessed, and welcome to my talk. I appreciate you being here. Hopefully everyone's socially lubricated from happy hour. CloudSec rules everything around me. When I was coming up with the talk name, I was listening to Wu-Tang Clan, because it's nothing to mess with. However, who am I and what am I doing here? Well, again, my name is Kyle, and yes, I do drink Monster. I do not punch holes into drywall, though, but Monster, yes. Should have had one today. I'm a cloud security architect. I also call myself a cloud security shaman, because I'm convinced that anything to deal with the cloud is all just fairy tales, pixie dust, and unicorn farts. So you gotta have fun with it, right? I'm also a SANS instructor. I teach a 5-day class, and I'm gonna try to boil down some really good key points to just kind of bring in the basics. And so the reason why I created this talk was because there's a lot of cool talks out there. They talk about hacking the cloud, DLP in the cloud, but I really looked and I was like, what about just the basics? Like, OMG, we found a AWS or Azure subscription. What do we need to do to make sure that we have security in sight, and how we do configuration management? What about incident response? Incident response will change, and we'll talk about that. So one thing I want to start with, though, is who here has heard, oh, we have a server in the cloud, so the service provider patches it for us? Who's heard of that before? For anyone watching this, there's about 1 trillion people in here. Everyone's hands just went up. So they have what they call a shared responsibility model. Well, Kyle, what the heck is that? Well, shared responsibility model is kind of like a diagram, of course, that tells you what you're responsible for and what the provider is responsible for. This changes based on the type of service you're consuming. Infrastructure as a service is going to be most common, especially with lift and shift type efforts, like we're going to close our data center and we need to move to the cloud. That's using Amazon EC2, Azure virtual machines. Those are your actual servers, right? And then we move to platform as a service. Most people love this. Azure SQL. It's a great platform. You get to use SQL, and guess what? You don't have to really manage the instance underlying on it. Who's met a happy SQL admin before? I used to be one, and I wasn't happy. And then you have software as a service. We'll talk about more on how these slide, but software as a service, the most common one I could think of is Office 365. You don't have to administer Exchange servers anymore. Hooray. So how does that change based on the consumption that you're using? Well, as you see, on-prem, everything's your responsibility. The hardware procurement, the networking, running the cables, getting the intern to crawl underneath the data center to, run a power line. Infrastructure, it starts to slide, and you'll see it just continues to get more and more into the service provider's arms versus yours. However, there still is a responsibility that you have as a consumer. An easy way to think about it is the service provider's responsible for security of the cloud, and you're responsible for security in it. You don't want your service provider to be able to just patch your instances all willy-nilly. That would be bad. Who here wants to have just a service provider have root level access to your EC2 instance or VM? How many of you have actually patched a database server or Exchange server, restarted it, and it came right back up? Unless if you're Bill O'Reillying it and going YOLO, hey, you live your life. First, we're going to talk about logging, now that we've kind of talked about the different types of services, right? So I want to tell you a tale. I was in a room of about 30 very smart individuals, and they said, we're going to the cloud. I'm like, I think we're already there, but how do we get all of our logging done to our C.R.E.A.M or log analytics capability? Well, I had the bright idea of, well, we're deploying this new tool. Let's set up every input we possibly can. Doing some bar napkin math, for each input that you created, you spawn a Python process. For 200 plus accounts and configuring 5 inputs each, I'm no rocket doctor, but that's a lot of math. And guess what search heads don't like when you do that? Exactly what I did. I crashed a search head. I like to wear it as a badge of honor because now when you use this particular add-on, there's a little warning that says, do not configure on search heads. I want to take pride in that and say that was me, because YOLO. So what kind of logging do we have when we use something like AWS? And we'll talk about Azure, don't worry, we'll talk about them too. When we talk about AWS, we have CloudTrail, that's like the flight recorder of your accounts, the who, what, where, when, and how. If it could tell me the why, that would be wonderful, but it doesn't. You have VPC Flow Logs. Now, who here is like a IDS or IPS administrator, and you're like, I love that box that I have. I get to monitor all the traffic. Your world is going to change when you move to the cloud. There is not really much east-west monitoring that we have available anymore, unless if we architect it and thus add more technical debt and cost more overhead. East-west kind of goes away. However, north-south is achievable. What's really awesome is they just came out with VPC mirroring, which is kind of like copying and pasting all the traffic going in and out of your VPC. But that's only available in Nitro instances at the moment. So that's something to be cognizant of. If you want to get flow logs, it's going to be, something you strategize, not just like, yeah, I turned it on, now what? With CloudWatch logs, this is a really cool capability because if you don't have $1 trillion SIEM, you can create alerts within those accounts based on this thing happened X amount of times. Send me an email, give me a phone call, send it to some sort of pipeline. However, would this really scale? If you're setting up, 200 accounts and you need to set up, 5 different CloudWatch metrics and alarms, how do you do that? I would argue that you would want to centralize it or use something like, insert big SIEM name here or log capability here. Let's take a look at a CloudTrail log. Ooh, we're all amazed. It's in JSON. It's colorful, yes. Imagine if it was exported in YAML. So CloudTrail logs are nice because they tell us the who, what, where, when, and how. And for the first part, we'll break it down, the who, the whom. So here we see an IAM user, and I blanked out the username because I'm in a room full of hackers. I also blanked out my account ID because, again, hackers. But we see that this is the account that it occurred on, and this is the user that logged in. Now, for this particular instance, I was just logging into the console, so nothing too crazy. However, if I was standing up like a EC2 instance or a virtual machine, we would have more information returned in the request parameters. So we could see Kyle stood up $1 billion per hour instance on this date and time. What's nice about CloudTrail logs is they include the user agent. So you can see how they authenticated. Were they using the AWS CLI? Were they using the SDK that's available? Were they using, Chrome, Safari? Who still uses Opera? However, what's tricky is, and I looked at a very large environment, there could be up to like 30 different user agents based on the version of the CLI, based on the version of your browser, based on the version of the SDK that you have. So if you're going to try to do some sort of long tail analysis there, just be cognizant of, we can't just say, oh, Chrome, Safari, Mozilla. You're going to probably get back a lot of different user agents, but depending on how big your environment is. So imagine we have 1 billion accounts. Well, how do we set up the plumbing to bring all of those logs into our $1 trillion log analytics tool? I would argue that centralizing the CloudTrail logs is a very efficient method. And you can actually do this with Azure event logs too. What you're doing is you're exporting those to what they call an event hub, and then you could have something just listening to that and then pull the logs. but you have a single point to consume these logs. What's nice about this is you're actually taking the evidence data, in a sense, out of the account that the actions are being performed in, and then keeping them nice and safe in the security account. That sounds great, right? Yes, Kyle, that sounds wonderful. But the trick is, you have a bucket policy that has a file size limit of 20 kilobytes. Well, Kyle, that is a large text file. Yes, it is, I would agree. However, when you start working with hundreds and hundreds of accounts, you can hit that hard limit. So how do we do that? And speaking of bucket policy, how do we make sure that we give the appropriate permissions to all of our accounts to add logs into that bucket? Work with the developer, like, hey, how do we automate this thing? How do we, determine it failed? Because I guarantee you, you're not going to want to have to manually do it. I mean, it's the funnest thing ever, right? So say we set up the plumbing for our CloudTrail logs. Do we want to look at flat files or JSON all day? No, we want to look at pretty dashboards. Ooh. Ah. What's great about visualizing this type of data, especially if you have it all centralized, is you could see where it's all happening. If you know that most of your developers are in a particular region, and then all of a sudden thousands of API calls are firing off outside of the country, that might be an indicator of bad news. Something to look into, right? What's also nice about visualizing these CloudTrail logs is you could see who's trying to do something that they're denied. If all of a sudden, Mark the intern is trying to stand up, 20 EC2 instances and it's failing, do you want to probably have a conversation with Mark? I would say, hey, yeah. Or do we need to get you the appropriate permissions? Always blame it on Mark. Another nice thing about CloudTrail logs, and this is kind of a big topic at the moment, S3 logging. Who is doing what to what files? And what's nice about this is it's not nice that it's not enabled by default, but if you enable it on the S3 bucket and then enable it in your CloudTrail, you then get these access logs. Then you could see what data is being written to, what data is being deleted, what is actually happening with those objects that reside in that S3 bucket. If you don't do a good job at data classification on premise, guess what? You could suck at it in the cloud too. So, I knew there was going to be one heckler. And we talked about flow logs. If you've ever looked at like T-Shark, that's really what the flow log looks like. If anyone got T-Shark stuck in your head, I apologize. But visualizing the traffic coming in and out, again, this is great for developers and also security use cases. And you'll notice that a lot of these different types of log sources are dual-purposed. You could argue that CloudTrail could be used for developers to understand what is changing in their environment. They could use that for configuration management. You could also use it for security auditing and investigations. With flow logs, again, not so much east-west information here, but what is coming in and out of our VPC. The VPC flow logs are really a, to, from, and what's nice is it also includes the account ID. However, otherwise, it's not too much information. There is no real, click, you get a PCAP, unless if you're using Azure, which is pretty legit. Or routing the traffic through a PCAP or a NAT instance, right? So when you're looking at CloudTrail logs, what are some bright ideas that you could come up with? Well, look for root user activity. Best practice is you should not be using the root account for anything. Okay, so funny story. You had to use the root account to submit a vulnerability assessment request. So that was kind of interesting. Yep. You also had to use the root for some billing stuff as well. But I could argue that you don't need to use it to stand up EC2 instances. So if you see root user activity occurring, kind of check and understand why that's happening. Another reason why this is a bad idea is because there's no actual user attributed to that action. All you see is the root user did A through Z. It's not mark the intern using the root user to perform these actions. So put MFA on that thing and lock it in a vault. Things to also look for is MFA being disabled. That's kind of an interesting event, right? Work with maybe some data scientists and get an understanding of, hey, if this MFA device is disabled from this source IP, from this user, and then is re-enabled from a different IP address, that might be an issue. There's a lot of different things you can do to fit your business use cases here. CloudTrail being disrupted. When CloudTrail was rolled out, it wasn't really enabled by default. But now, if you log into your AWS console, you see events there, right? But it's still not logging to what we call a trail, and that's how we get those logs out of your account and into your C.R.E.A.M, or log analytics tool. But when you turn that trail off, it sends one more API call saying, hey, I've been turned off, kind of like the last shot in the sky. So looking out for that, because it could be disruption for evidence tracking, is a good idea. Now you can argue, yes, you can prevent this from happening through organizations and service control policies, but say you don't have that large of an organization that leverages those tools. This is still a great idea to get alerted on if it happens. Lots of instances being turned on, lots of instances being turned off. Billing alarms, OMG. I can't tell you how many times I've been on Reddit and I've seen, hey, I think my account got hacked because now it says I'm going to be spending $10,000. You can set up billing alarms that'll tell you what your projected cost is for that month. Like I was literally sitting earlier today and I got an email saying, your projected cost is $50. I know I'm breaking the bank here, right? But I want to spend only $5. So using billing alarms is a great way to determine compromise. What do we get with Azure? So with Azure, you get a whole lot of different logging, but we're going to focus again on activity logs. And then network security group logs, very similar to Flow, except through Network Manager, you can now do a PCAP, which is cool. With activity logs, what I like about them a lot is there's this correlation ID. So you could see when Mark the intern requested to turn on an instance and what the actual status of that action was. Did it get started and then completed and then is now running? Or did it get started and then it was denied because of some policy that you might have in place on the role that he's using? Office 365 is its own little beast, and we could spend a whole hour talking about it. In fact, someone already did at BSidesLV. The tricky thing about Office 365 logging, though, and the highlights that I take away from that talk and what I'll tell all my friends since we're BFFs now, is mailbox logging was not enabled by default on your tenant. They now were rolling it out to where it is now enabled by default, but verify that. Because if you don't have mailbox logging enabled, you're not going to know anything about those mailboxes, especially if you have high-level executives that need to have, sensitive actions performed. Another thing about it is you use an Office 365 management API. Sometimes you can get rate limited depending on the amount of events you receive. And also to make things tricky, the Office 365 management API has an Active Directory integration, so you can pull Azure AD logs from this API. But then Azure AD has a whole different logging capability. And believe it or not, they don't have the same logs. So you might be logging both of these things, depending on what your requirements are. Isn't that fun? And that's not a dig at all, it's just the fact of the matter. They're constantly improving this stuff. But, current state as of today, using both APIs could be recommended. This is my favorite topic, where we talk about continuous compliance, because, I don't know, it makes me feel good to know that I'm continuously compliant. Right? Gives me the warm and fuzzies. And what we want to do here is we want to say bye-bye to shadow IT, and we get to in a way. Who's ever seen that crusty old box that's kind of limping along and you hear the fan kind of like going whoosh, and you're like, hey, what's that thing doing? It's like, oh, I don't know, man, don't touch it. Might break our whole enterprise. And then you kick it and then the lights turn off for some reason. Shadow IT has been a big problem with on-premise deployments, right? Who's had a big problem with Shadow IT? For those watching, everyone's hands go up. But what's nice is with Azure, AWS, any service provider, you're really just using APIs when you're using the user interface. It's just visualizing the API for you. You have the ability to query these APIs to get an idea of your whole environment. You can use that for asset inventory. Who's heard of the CIS critical controls? Yeah, what's one of the top things up there? Inventory. If you don't know what you got, how can you protect your neck? That's a shout out to Wu-Tang. However, now we have a new unique problem. Shadow accounts. There's been times where, I'll be talking to someone and, yeah, so I just stood up an account and I'm using my P card for that. Well, we can't protect that, right? Now, you may have to get clever with your management team on how you can detect shadow accounts, but it's something to be concerned about because if someone is storing business data in their personal account, it's going to be hard to get it out, right? I would agree, yeah. So if you're having a developer do all their development in a personal account, then they need to push it to prod. You have business assets in an uncontrolled environment. Other continuous compliance tools allow us to check to see what has changed in our environment, which is wonderful. Because who's ever had the problem of, hey, how come the network adapter is set to a static IP instead of dynamically assigned now? Or, hey, who changed the DNS record on this mailbox server because now everything is always DNS, right? Services like AWS Config allow us to do this. Again, if you don't have multi-billion-dollar tools, these are great services to leverage. AWS Config, they had a quick start, and it's now integrated with Security Hub. So if you wanted to stand up like the CIS benchmarks, which is a wonderful way to kind of bring up a good baseline of security if you don't have to abide by something like HIPAA or PCI or SOC 2, these are great ideas. What you can do is you can have configuration checks to say, hey, this EC2 instance or this RDS server or anything, if it doesn't fall into these parameters, show it as non-compliant. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Previously, it was like $2 a config rule to just have the rule existing in your account per month. So we'll talk about scaling again. You have hundreds of accounts. It's $2 a config rule. Now, keep in mind, AWS Config is a regional service. So if you enable it, you're not enabling it for your whole AWS account. That could be problematic because if you want to leverage the elasticity that you get by using cloud services, you're going to have to monitor multiple regions. But what's new as of recently is now it's based on invocation for whenever the config rule triggers. So now if you just have a rule sitting there, it shouldn't cost you money. Always verify that stuff though. I'm no billing expert. I use an Abacus account. Here's a fun story. In the config rules I mentioned, it can evaluate when you do a configuration change, or you can have it set to periodically. If you are in the process of moving hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of servers over, and you have a config rule that is going to evaluate every time something changes with the EC2 API, guess what? That thing is going to evaluate a ton. And then you're going to get, hey, Kyle, this thing costs us a lot of money. Or from AWS saying, hey, this thing reached the throttling and we needed to kind of shut it off. So understand how you do these evaluations is going to be based on your business requirements and also what's going on at that current time. If you're moving hundreds of EC2 instances over or VMs over, should you have that rule evaluating on every change? Or would it make more sense to do it periodically? I can't tell you that because I can't answer for your business, but that's something to take into consideration. What's also nice is it takes your resources and gives you an idea of all of your resources and what happens on the timeline. This S3 bucket had a bucket policy added by Mark the intern, and it allowed it to be accessible from the internet. Thanks, Mark. There's other third-party tools that are a lot of really cool open source projects, and I'll talk about a couple of them. One's called Prowler by a gentleman named Tony. And Prowler is a really cool command line based capability that allows you to look at your account and parse it with CIS benchmarks. Because again, those are just great ideas to look at. It could perform GDPR. It could also do HIPAA. What's also very unique about it though, is it could do a forensic readiness test. So that'll tell you if you have all your ducks in a row to do forensics on that account. That's really cool. How do we go about, scaling this though? Another really cool tool is by Netflix, small media company, called Security Monkey. Easily one of my favorite names for a tool, Security Monkey. It's part of the Simian Army. What's nice about this tool is it uses what we'll call cross-account role authentication, and we'll drill into that in a second. But long story short, the TLDR on there is you don't have to have a local user for every single account you want to evaluate, because then you start getting key rotation, key management, user lifecycle. I don't want to spoil all the fun for identity and access management, so I won't until we get there, but that's just a nice feature. What's also really cool is that if it sees you have a janky configuration, it's like, hey, this thing is not really a good idea, you can actually accept that risk. It's pretty darn cool. So if you have businesses that have different risk appetites, or like, yeah, we know that thing is not really the best practice, but it's imperative that we have it like this for it to run properly, you could put, okay, this was approved, risk evaluated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then you won't receive that information anymore, which is also nice. Signal to noise ratios, right? And then with commercial tools, there's a tool called RedLock. They recently got bought by Palo Alto. A SaaS platform that monitors AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, does HIPAA, GDPR again, SOC 2, CIS benchmarks. And it does the same where you can accept the risk of something that alerts. It also uses cross-account role authentication. What's also nice about this tool is it has a very well-documented API. So if you don't even want to have to touch the user interface and you just want to integrate it to your CI/CD pipeline, oh man, DevOps words now. But if you want to present that information just via API, you can do so. I am up here now. Identity and access management. So identity and access management is still a huge problem. If you don't do it well on-prem, you could do it even worse in the cloud. I mentioned cross-account role authentication, and I'll beat that thing into the ground because I love it. It helps you out so much. So what does that actually mean? Well, most of us probably use Active Directory and some sort of federated identity like Ping or Okta or OneLogin. What this allows us to do is manage access at a global group level and then use federated identity to do a SAML assertion or doing a SAML assertion and assuming a role into an account. So say I am Mark the intern and I need to access a security role in the Glue Factories account. What I could do here is I can log into my security account, and then from there, all of the other accounts that we support have what they call a trust policy that allows Mark the intern to assume the security role as long as it's from this account ID and from this specific role. And here are all the permissions that apply to him. This is very similar to how those other tools would work with cross-account authentication. What's nice here is that you're still using a single source of truth for user identity because user lifecycle is fun. You get to enforce your local user passwords, your MFA, and then it just kind of blasts you off into your accounts. It's a beautiful thing. With Azure, You don't really have to do much of this because everything under your domain in Azure is just in one single pane. Dare I say single pane of glass. Who has a bingo card right now? So that's what's nice about using those types of authentication methods. Because imagine having hundreds of user accounts across hundreds of different AWS accounts or subscriptions, and you need to enforce key rotation on that. It's going to be a fun task to figure out, I guarantee it. What are some of the best practices? MFA, MFA, MFA. You probably have MFA on your Facebook. Why wouldn't you have MFA on like the administrative console for your cloud service footprint? Thank you. Using federated identities is also great because could you say with confidence that if Mark the intern was done with his internship, he's going back to school, we can guarantee without a doubt that he no longer has access to any of our accounts? That's a scary thought. And that's why we want to look into how do we do lifecycle management with local users as well. You know, if you fail to plan here, you could really plan to fail. It's really hard to herd all the cats back into the barn after they've been let out and running around. Who's ever tried to pick up a cat from a field and try to bring him back in the house? I know I haven't. I see some hands and they're just like, oh my God, yes I did. There's scars. Emotionally too. So with user lifecycle policies, using tags can help out a lot as well. If you have a service account that is a local user, tag it with, what is this thing for? Who owns it? What's their email address? What's their blood type? No, but what you want to do here is you want to enable your incident responders to quickly identify, oh, this thing just, updates NTP, but this is the owner of it. So if you disable the key, because you never want to delete a key right off the bat, because you'll never get it back, ask me, I'll tell you. You disable the key, hit up the owner saying, hey, we think your key's been compromised. Okay, I'll rotate it out of the application that's using it. Perfect. Or heaven forbid, no, don't delete it. It's embedded into our application. It'll break everything. Using automation can help out a lot too. So say you do have suspected key compromise, you can tag that particular user and say, investigation, then like your case ID or something like that, and then automatically disable it. There's actually a really cool tool called AWS IR, and it allows you to automate disabling of the key. We'll talk about incident response and what we can do there. So again, your incident response plan is going to change because what do we not have when it comes to using a cloud service provider? If I walked up to a data center, knocked on the door and said, hey, I'm in the middle of investigation, I need my hard drive, they're going to drag me off the property and probably have me arrested. So how do we adapt our incident response plan to a service provider? Do our imaging standards change? How do we do our incident response? Do we test our incident response? Have we verified that we can actually perform incident response? There's nothing worse than letting your IR team just watch the world burn because they don't have the appropriate access to do their job. Well, how do you verify that? Doing game days, testing it out, testing your tools. That's kind of like assuming your DR plan works until you need to actually DR. Test your incident response plan. Are there any lessons learned on something that you can do to improve on? So with that being said, we kind of shot through this. Does anyone have questions and not more or less I have more of a comment than a question? Question.
Okay. From a multi-company standpoint, if nobody has any key management already in place on-prem, what would you say was your best recommendation for key management in the cloud?
So the question was, for a multi-company business that doesn't have on-prem key management, what do you do when you move to the cloud? Well, one, if you can avoid using local users, that's a thumbs up. Two, what you can do is you could use something like a configuration management tool like, Prowler, RedLock, or CIS bench or config rules to show you when an access key starts to get towards, say, like X amount of days. So say you have a policy in place that says every 90 days you have to rotate your key. Identifying the owners and putting ownership onto them is going to be a big part of it. Unless if you're going to have a team that's dedicated to doing identity and access management in your cloud footprint, it could be a challenge and very big challenge to tackle. Some may say, you can use the AWS CLI to just grab a token and assume a role instead of using a local user. It'll vary. There is no silver bullet.
Yeah, so in terms of doing, say, detection and response, the automated response side, it seems like AWS, SNS, and Azure Event Hub have minute-level granularity, not sub-second level granularity. Do you have any solutions for sub-second level or sub-second level event generation?
Not really, because we're limited. So the question was, how can we get results or events faster than what the cloud service provider will give it to us? We're really limited to that. That's, at our beck and call. And that's just something that we have to learn to accept because we can't force those logs out of the service provider faster than what they're being generated at.
Hey, thanks for the talk, by the way.
Thank you.
So what are your thoughts on automation around incident response and detection, like setting up Lambdas, and obviously you have to deploy cross-region and a lot of things. So kind of what do you use and what are you kind of seeing as the future of that?
Yeah, so how do we automate incident response and make it multi-region and just work very gooder? Well, using Lambda functions is great, or using CLI-based tools. I highly recommend automating a playbook because if it's something that's repeatable, why do it yourself, right? That's the great thing about using cloud services. Just automate the toil. I have seen where if an incident occurs and an investigation needs to happen, it automates standing up a SIFT workstation, takes a snapshot of the potentially compromised host, shares that snapshot with the security account, and then you can attach that snapshot once you create the volume as a read-only volume to that forensic workstation, and then you can perform your analysis. There are tools out there like Margarita Shotgun that allow you to take a memory image, but the problem with that, and I would argue that a problem with a lot of different types of incident response when using cloud services, what if that server is not domain joined? How do you authenticate to that server to perform that acquisition?
So we are trying to move right now from multiple individual user accounts in multiple AWS accounts into a single federated model. Do you have any recommendations on the best way to accomplish that?
Sounds like $1 million question. So it really depends on how you want to leverage accounts too, because I've seen businesses leverage separate accounts to limit the blast radius. So say you'll say, HRIT, they use this account for only their HR stuff and no one else has access except maybe the incident response team, right? How do you go about federating that access? Well, do you want it to be like a hybrid model where you can access those resources very similar as you would as it's an on-prem data center? Because then you're setting up like direct connects or VPNs to access that. Or are you going to do a pure public deployment where you're accessing everything using a public IP address? It's a challenge and really something to strategize as you're moving the workloads, because otherwise you may have all these workloads moved over. And then you're like, well, maybe this deployment model wasn't really the best thing. So how do you want to access it? How do you want to secure it? Or what kind of visibility do you need to create?
Hey, thanks for the talk. You mentioned AWS and Azure. Do you have much GCP experience? And if so, what are the parallels for each of the points you talked about?
So I myself haven't leveraged GCP as much. From what I've just been at an enterprise standpoint, leveraging AWS and Azure has been a big strategy that I've seen. I've seen also a lot of developers leveraging Google Cloud. That's not necessarily a dig at all. I just personally haven't used it that much.
You noticed that reinforced that Amazon now has the virtual network tab, right? I haven't played with it, so I don't know what it can actually do for you, but it's there now.
So were you speaking of like the VPC traffic mirroring that AWS now offers? Okay. Yeah, so yeah, that is available now, however, on Nitro instances only. So if your incident response or your plan is, hey, we want to do VPC mirroring, you will need to architect that on Nitro instances, which is like AWS's super custom created infrastructure that they made. And it's been available now for, I want to say, a couple months. I know they announced the service publicly at Reinforce in June. But yeah, that's a cool capability that could have some cool functions.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi. So just curious, have you ever had a situation where you've had to aggregate multiple SIMs into a singular SIM for log aggregation due to license costs, scope, size, scale? That makes sense.
No. So the question was, have I had to ever take log data from multiple SIEMs and then pop it into one single? No, thankfully. It's been one tool to kind of rule them all. But if you want to do something like a data lake, so then other, various tools, like, naming just a few, like Splunk, Logarithm, Sumo Logic, and you want to just consume the data doesn't matter on what tool you use, that's an option.
So the reason I ask is because Azure has set no coding out.
Yeah. Okay, so if a service provider has like a native SIEM capability in it, no, I haven't. Those tools do have a place. I'm still playing with those as well, but I don't know if they'll. Yeah, not at the moment. I haven't.
So kind of a follow-up, data transfer costs can be a big thing. Do you have any thoughts on reducing that?
Data transfer costs. There's actually a diagram, and I'll actually tweet it out because it shows where you would get charged for where your data is going and how it's traversing. Really, the answer is there's no simple way that I have found other than just, monitoring what's going in and out and your billing, right? But there's a diagram I could tweet out that shows where it is you're getting billed when you get transferred and all that. So on the tweeters, Kyle HacksY, super clever when it comes to Twitter handles.
Hey, Kyle.
Hello.
I was hoping you might have some words of wisdom on closing the knowledge gap between like your classic SIM, your classic IT security shop, and where incidents are happening in the cloud and where developers are living in honestly a more cloud-centric world.
Yeah. So closing the knowledge gap. That is a tough one because it could be based on, who's actually, do you have your own cloud security team or cloud security or cloud developers? But closing the gap is really just socializing and bringing in different exercises. If we were to do this on-prem, look at your playbooks on-prem. How can we transform those into the cloud? There's lots of different basic trainings out there and a lot of different comparison charts. So if you do it in AWS this way, this is how you could do it in Azure. Or if you're looking for something like AWS config in Azure, this is what you're looking for. But I think it comes with communicating a lot. They say when you move to the cloud, security is ground zero. It's everyone's responsibility at that point, and I would agree. We do have to make relationships with developers. Oh my geez, yes, we do have to create relationships. And I have found that creating those relationships are very beneficial because when they come across something, they're like, uh-oh, I don't know if this is a good thing. They come to you. You know, instead of, you got to kind of transform the mental model of how security is operated, right? You know, if we keep saying no every time we're invited to the barbecue, we're going to be, you know, not invited to the barbecue anymore. So how can we make that a mutually beneficial relationship?
Can you tell we're friends? So if you were to give your Independence Day speech on moving to the cloud for the people who are still stuck in mainframe land and like, I will lose my job if we move all these servers to the cloud, what would you say to a security and a systems team to make them understand that this is not a bad thing?
You don't have to worry about the humidity in your data center.
That's because you live in
Dry heat. Thanks for doxing me, bro. You don't have to worry about tape backups. You know, who's ever had to restore a tape backup, but, you know, the storage facility is across a summit pass, and that summit experienced 8 feet of snow, and then, you know, this company can't take their semis across the summit, and you're like, oh man, that sucks. Kind of triggered there, right?
No, I'm going through the same thing.
But yeah, I would show the shared responsibility model and say, look at all the things you don't need to do anymore. You don't need to lift that pizza box into a rack of money. Now, when it comes to spending in the cloud, that's also a tricky thing. What's also nice is that you can scale your resources up and down very, very easily. How many of you have ever had like to provision a VM and you're like, I want 64 gigs of RAM and all the storage and all the CPUs, and then you're actually only leveraging about 10% of that, you know, capability or the horsepower that you got. Well, you can be more cost effective and scale that down. You don't really need 100 million gigs of RAM and 30 teraflops of CPU. Yeah.
What is the best practice on protecting the root account passwords? Because if I put it in a safe or I put it in an HSM, then I don't have disaster recovery for that location. And if I put it in 1Password, I don't have audits of who accessed it, and I'm not compliant with PCI because now we have a shared admin account.
Right. So using something like a password vault that has user attribution on who checked in and out the password is great. If you still have like a security office that would do, you know, mark the intern, check the USB key or the YubiKey or the Gemalto hard token, or, you know, the phone that has all of our MFA tokens on it out at this time and then checked it back in at that time. That's a good way. Really depends on where. So working with a global company, it could be tricky because you can have an office where the security team sits in building A in a different state than the development team. Now, who is better postured to handle those keys? We could all argue as security pros and lead hacksaws that we should probably own those keys, right? But if they need to do administrative tasks and they're doing after hours, do you have someone on call to grab that key for you? Yeah, you can't really duplicate those hard tokens, right? So that in itself is a challenge. Fireproof safe in a security office.
Have you done cost simulations of the alternatives of sending your SIM data on-prem versus keeping it in both a SIM in the cloud and an S3 bucket, respectively?
So that is a great question. I'm glad you asked it. Where do you send your log data when you are consuming cloud services and you have like an on-prem deployment? Or is it appropriate to have something deployed to the cloud? I recall a time where I sent thousands and thousands and thousands of events to an on-prem collector, and it saturated a WAN link and caused, you know, a little bit of disruption. Sorry. So when you're starting to shift to the cloud, do you start using like a cloud-based SIM or log analytics tool? I would argue that it's appropriate. You know, keep the cloud in the cloud. no sense in bringing it back on-prem, because then if you have, a cloud service-based SIEM, it's coming back on-prem to just go back out. I mean, you're just getting costs everywhere. You could store it in an S3 bucket, absolutely. You could form a data lake using S3. I've seen companies do that, yeah.
Have you done the cost simulation?
I personally have not done the cost simulation, no. That would be tricky, and it goes back to, how tricky is data transfer rates, right?
Were you first? Can you get around the 20 kilobyte bucket policy limitation?
Can you get around it? No, it's a hard limit. That's etched in stone for now. I say that, and then tomorrow it's going to change.
If I'm expecting like thousands of accounts, how would you solve that?
Separate it, mate. So the question was, if you had a bucket policy that you need to manage and had thousands of accounts, maybe breaking up different buckets for different types of business units would be appropriate, or by different businesses themselves, or the use cases. Like, these are all of our development accounts, and so all the dev data is going to go into this bucket. All of our production accounts will go into this bucket. It's how something to strategize.
Again, the gentleman. Yeah. So you wouldn't actually go and split it into several organizations similar to the Azure folder structure?
Right. You'd be actually creating different buckets themselves.
Okay.
Yep. I think we got 5 more minutes left, unless if anyone has any other questions. I'll be out in the hall or drinking water. Stay hydrated. It's hot here.
A lot of the cloud security auditing tools are sort of reactive in the sense that they're dynamically querying the Amazon API and getting the status back.
Correct.
Have you seen anything for proactive, assuming that like you're going completely through your CI/CD pipeline and Terraform, and you want to check that something's compliant before you actually allocate the resources in Amazon?
Yeah, so again, question is, how do you be more proactive instead of reactive when a janky configuration might get pushed through? Long story short, yes, you can do that in your CI/CD pipeline. There are a lot of open source projects that do that right now, and I do believe that Palo Alto just came out with one where it'll check CloudFormation templates and your Terraform template to look to see if anything is out of a compliance like CIS or HIPAA. But yeah, that is a great place to do it, and using tools to integrate to that CI/CD pipeline. Who's ever had to ask someone to fix something after they've done it and they're like, oh, I've already been tasked to another project, I could check that out in 2 weeks? It happens a lot to all of us. So having that immediate feedback loop for those development teams is a really good idea. Yeah, that's achievable though. I think we're going to get kicked out.